Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Akshat Meni, and I'm a research assistant at the Institute of Chinese Studies, New Delhi. It is a matter of great honor for me to extend a warm and humble welcome to all to another edition of the ICS's Wednesday seminar titled Evaluating the Dichotomies in India and China's Regionalism in the Indo-Pacific Region. In the broader context of a free and open rules-based Indo-Pacific regional framework, it is crucial to examine the significant contrasts between India and China's approaches to regionalism. India's strategy in recent years has been driven by a commitment to strategic autonomy and a multipolar regional order, whereas China has focused on a Sinocentric reorganization of the region. In contrast, India's evolving policies, such as the Look East policy, Neighborhood First, and Act East policy, highlight its increasing engagement with the Indo-Pacific, positioning itself as a key regional stakeholder. This shift has fostered closer security cooperation between India and other major powers, particularly in the Indian Ocean region. Meanwhile, China's regional strategy is centered upon its String of Pearls initiative, and the Belt and Road Initiative and its debt trap diplomacy, which promote its expansionist agenda at the expense of regional security and interests. In response, India has advanced security regionalism through minilateral and trilateral arrangements. These trends not only underscore India's emergence as a significant strategic partner, but also highlight its potential to leverage its geostrategic position to drive regional economic integration. Today's seminar will delve into and evaluate the regional strategies of both China and India in the Indo-Pacific. We are pleased to have with us today as a speaker Dr. Kulkarni Mandar Vijay, Associate Professor at Githam School of Humanities and Social Sciences, Hyderabad. He is a member of the Japan Society for International Development and Regional Studies Association, the United Kingdom. Dr. Mandar received his doctoral degree from the Graduate School of International Development, Nagoya University in 2013. His research interests lie in the broad areas of international economic development, innovation studies, and regional studies. We are also honored to have with us today Dr. Ritusha Mani Tiwari, Assistant Professor at the Department of Political Science, Shahid Bhagat Singh College, University of Delhi. She holds a doctorate in Chinese studies from Jawaharlal Nehru University and is an honorary fellow at the Institute of Chinese Studies, New Delhi. She is also the associate editor of the prestigious journal China Report. Further, she is also the IOE fellow at the Delhi School of Transnational Studies, University of Delhi, and her areas of specialization include East Asian regionalism, China's political economy, and foreign policies of India and China. Now, before I hand over to the chair, I would like to ask all participants to please follow a few housekeeping rules. All participants shall be muted during this seminar. Questions may be posted in the chat box along with your name and full affiliation. Alternatively, you may use the raise your hand option during the interactive session. You shall then be called upon to unmute yourself. Thank you, and the floor is yours, Dr. Tiwari.
Thank you, Akshat. I'm thankful to the Institute of Chinese Studies for inviting me to chair the session. This is indeed a very interesting and emerging topic. I am looking forward to hearing from Dr. Kulkarni. Some of the aspects that one can, from the outset, flag off as the areas of interest when one talks about regionalism in Indo-Pacific and looking at a comparative of India and China in terms of its strategies include the very aspect of identity of these two particular countries, and also the identity of the region that we are calling Indo-Pacific. Similarly, it's also a matter of opportunities that this region presents, and not to mention the various processes in terms of institutions, organizational structures that are emergent in this particular region. They also complicate the entire, narrative and discourse that is going to be unfolding. So I'm quite looking forward to it. And without taking away much time, I invite Dr. Kulkarni to come to take over and present his lecture.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ritusha Mani Tiwari, for this generous explanation. About the your interest in my topic and in the overall discussion here. So good afternoon to everyone. I'm really honored and really pleased to have been invited by ICS, Institute of Chinese Studies, to give a talk in your prestigious Wednesday seminar series. So, and first of all, I would like to thank the organizers once again, and Dr. Ritushamini Tiwari, Dr. Alka Acharya, and all my colleagues here. And let me start my presentation without further delay. So I have a PPT here. Yeah, so I'm clearly audible and the screen is visible, right? Yeah. So let me start here. So my presentation today revolves around evaluating the dichotomies in India's and China's regionalism in the Indo-Pacific region. So yeah, this topic is relatively, to me, it's of course, it's a new topic as such, because I'm talking about these dichotomies in India's and China's approach to regionalism, particularly in the context of Indo-Pacific, which is a relatively new construct. So in that sense, we are all exploring the dichotomies, and not just dichotomies, but also the similarities to some extent, the overlap also in the approaches by both the countries when it comes to their, whether it is about economic diplomacy, military diplomacy, naval diplomacy, and, whether it is about their, military economic strategies. So let me start here. Yeah, so today I'll briefly talk about starting with Indo-Pacific as a regional construct. I mean, when we talk within the context of Indo-Pacific, I will brief about what is it, how do we understand Indo-Pacific as compared to its predecessor called Asia-Pacific. So it's a free, open, inclusive, and emerging, rule-based regional order, followed by the Sinocentric approach to regionalism, some of the characteristics of China's approach in Indo-Pacific over the last decade or so. Then I will switch to India, and I'll try to contrast the India's approach again to, the security, and particularly the security mechanism, to the security regional construct, to the security regional configuration in Indo-Pacific, and how it, is there any overlap or are there differences between China and India? And in the end, I'll conclude my presentation with some of the key takeaways from the presentation. So, just being a student, as a small caveat that I'm also a student of these regional studies, and I'm not really a China expert, but I have pulled together this presentation, having my understanding about China and India, and within the context, it's not I just wanted to narrow it down to regionalism, the idea of particularly this regionalism within the security perspective, right? Yeah. So as you can see, well, the very context here is that we have had, it's not that Indo-Pacific is something, the new regional security architecture or the new regional order, which has been established overnight. We have had the old security architecture in Asian context, particularly, or in the broader what we call the Asia-Pacific context. So that old security architecture was particularly driven by the United States, right? And what we call normally, what we know is that the nomenclature is Asia-Pacific, and its institutionalization is called APEC, right? In a narrower sense. So this Asia-Pacific as the old security architecture here is basically US-led, US-centric, and particularly post-Korean War of 1950-53, US decided to focus on this Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean region and the littoral states here. So it came up with this hub and spokes, architecture, security architecture, what we call the old security architecture. And of course, if you see, US established its allies in the Indo-Pacific, or you call Asia-Pacific, according to the old architecture, starting with, you have Japan, South Korea, Philippines, Australia, Thailand, right? And it has its military bases and military personnel, right? So if you see that it has had 42 military bases in Japan, 32 in South Korea, and few more in the Philippines and Thailand and Australia as well. It has also large presence of the military personnel in all these regions. And of course, it has ceased to be Taiwan used to be the US ally, which ceased since 1979. It's no more the US allies, right? So these allies emphasize that US was far more, like interested from the security and economic perspective in this Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean regions, right? And most of these allies, and as you see, the hub and spokes model, or the architecture was based on these bilateral alliances between US and its security allies, as we have seen. Now, post, as you can see, the Cold War, the old security architecture started, replaced. It's been witnessing changes, and has been slowly replaced by the new security architecture, and what we normally call it as now Indo-Pacific, right? And the rationale behind this change lies with, emergence of the Asian, economies. So we have had this long history of, like, you must have heard about the East Asia miracle, or the newly industrialized economies, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong. And we have seen the remarkable growth and development from these Asian economies, right? And that also later on, some of the Southeast Asian countries also started like they also became the prominent economies with their high growth rates, and and most of these models were export-led because they have had a very smaller markets. And then, of course, India joined the bandwagon post 1991, economic reforms. So at some point, we have noticed that we saw that in the 90s, US also to some extent, kind of withdrew or reduced its focus on this region. But later again, having seen the remarkable growth and Asian dynamism, for instance, the Obama administration decided to have a refocus on the Asian region, right? Particularly in terms of, because to be part of the Asian dynamism. So the former Clinton, Obama administration decided to focus on the Asia. And as you can, we all knew that it kind of, made Asia as its priority region, right? And decided to reinforce its military, diplomatic, and economic emphasis on the Indo-Pacific, right? So what we call the pivot to Asia, and it led to also the emergence of the new security architecture and the nomenclature Indo-Pacific, right? So if you see, well, of course, the idea of Indo-Pacific goes back to the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe when he gave the speech in the New Delhi, talking about the confluence of the two, Pacific and the Indian Oceans, right? And later the idea was also picked up in the pivot to Asia, right, by the former, by the Obama administration, in 2011. And the term Indo-Pacific appears for the first time officially in the white paper Australia in the Asian Century. Later on, we have seen that, of course, the Shinzo Abe also talked about FOIP, Free and Open Indo-Pacific Strategy. In 2016, in 2018, India also gave its contours of Indo-Pacific concept, right, in the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore. And well, so there have been so many these chronological developments which led to the emergence of the new security architecture, which is, well, of course, away, different from the old security architecture, which was US-led bilateral and driven by the bilateral allies of the US, the hub and spokes, architecture of the security alliances. So now the new architecture, security architecture, which of course was to some extent initiated by the pivot to Asia by the US, the Obama administration 2011, but later on it became an arena for the regional, players to emphasize their and to safeguard their, security and military interests. So it's also definitely what we have seen, the emergence of Southeast Asian countries, followed by, of course, China and now India, which has become a key stakeholder in this new security architecture. So this Indo-Pacific, which is now commonly referred to as the free, open, inclusive, and rule-based order, came most like, as we have seen in the last, post 2007, 2010, right? Okay, and it has given, of course, we have seen many strategies and visions as already discussed, like the free and open Indo-Pacific by Japan, then ASEAN, outlook on Indo-Pacific, the Indo-Pacific Ocean initiatives by India, other countries like Australia, France, Germany, and Netherlands also joined in the bandwagon, giving their own, most of these strategies and visions, of course, emphasize or highlight or underscore the relevance of Indo-Pacific in the current 21st century, right? And yeah, okay. So, well, this led to a new pivot to this region, and we would like to explore whether it has become far more Sinocentric or whether it has still remained US-led, whether, this pivot has helped to understand the regional order has changed from a bipolar to multipolar, and what are the mechanisms, which led to that multipolar regional order that we talk about, unilateral and trilateral mechanisms here. So in the end, we would, we kind of reached, it's not the consensus or conclusion, but yes, a kind of de facto, you may call it, but partial conclusion that India has, to some extent, become the net security provider in the region based on its, initiative strategies, and it's more of its, its approach in the region, right? So I already discussed about hub and spokes and the US allies in the Indo-Pacific. And we also saw this chronological order, how the old security architecture called Asia-Pacific was kind of, slowly replaced by the new Indo-Pacific approach. And now I move to the next part of my talk, which is about the China's approach, right, to the security mechanism or the security architecture in Indo-Pacific. So it is from the literature, to some extent, what we saw is that, yes, it is the expansionist approach led by China, which is kind of providing, it's not fully, but there has been these elements of, destabilizing the region, the security mechanism of the region because of certain, conflicting areas, particularly with respect to China and some of these South and Southeast Asian countries in the region. So as you can see, there are these main hotspots, right, which lead to the contentions and conflict between China and some of the Asian economies. So we have I'll not go into the details of that, but many of us know about the conflict in the East China Sea between the People's Republic of China and Japan, surrounding the Senkaku Islands for long, and Japan controlled the island since 1972, and there have been clashes and provocations between the two countries, right, with respect to the coast guards, fishing boats, naval vessels provocating each other. There also the other area which emerged recently between, again, uh, the conflict in the South China Sea, the territorial dispute between, again, China and ASEAN member states, including the Philippines, Vietnam, Brunei, Malaysia, which leads to, again, the clashes involving fishing boats, coast guard vessels, navy ships. So it's about the sovereign claim over the waters between these Southeast Asian countries and China. Okay, some of the world's most important maritime trade routes pass through the South China Sea, as you know, and it is a very contentious and equally critical region for China and the Southeast Asian countries. Another area of contention is the Taiwan conflict. The conflict between, again, China and Taiwan has mainly been over the status of the island. Taiwan considers itself a de facto sovereign state, while China views Taiwan as part of PRC. We all know this history behind it. But Beijing has stepped up attempts to increase the pressure on Taipei, and in turn to on the US. Okay, as US played as a close partner of Taiwan, with military maneuvers in the waters, okay, and airspace around Taiwan. And last but not the least, the Indo-China border conflict. Okay, so okay, the most recent armed clashes, as we all know, in 2020, during which the official 20 Indian soldiers and 4 Chinese soldiers died. There has been recent news about a de-escalation of the tensions around the border. So these are some of the hotspots we may call, or the elements destabilizing the regional security in the region, and equally emphasizing China's expansionist approach. But so that's one side of the story. Moving forward, yeah. So to give this example, well, I don't have to go into the details, but as we all know, South China Sea versus the West Philippine Sea has become one of the highlights in recent times. But in 1992, with the exit of US bases from the Philippines, China started building initial structures surrounding the Stilts in Mischief Reef. And then, of course, in 1999, Philippines sent out the BRP Sierra Madre, its ship in the second Thomas Shaw, right, to assert its presence in the West Philippine Sea, right? And of course, there has been also the adoption of the West Philippine Sea in 2012. There were international arbitration dismissing China's 9-dash line, which was ignored by China. And of course, there have been many confrontation in recent times between the Philippines and the Chinese coastal, coast guards and the ships there. Okay, so yeah, well, the Philippines' most contentious disputes with China center, as we all know, around the Spratly Islands, and which lies within the Philippines' 200-mile exclusive economic zone, right? So in 1999, the Philippines intentionally grounded this ship to reinforce its territorial claim, right? And since then, the Philippine Coast Guards has conducted monthly resupply mission to its military contingent on the ship, right? So, and then the Chinese Coast Guard vessels began to employ these tactics of harassment, to the Philippine resupply mission in 2023. Yeah, they actually signed the temporary agreement to de-escalate the tension, but the both sides have many disagreements than the agreements. Philippines and Japan also signed reciprocal access agreement, and Japan has provided, some of these military support to the Philippines and Vietnam for their strengthening their securities. Okay, so that's just one of the illustrations of the earlier, elements of destabilizing factors in the region. Yeah. So this is again the graphical representation of these entire conflicts, right? You can see that these Spratly Islands, where China, Taiwan, Malaysia, Brunei, and the Philippines and Vietnam claim sovereignty over all parts of these scattered island and reefs. And there has been this you can also see the red line, right? The China's 9-dash line, right? Maritime claim. We also have the blue line here, which gives us the West Philippine Sea territory. So there are all these countries and China have been disputing in this South China Sea, which led to a higher escalation of tensions in the 2023. And of course, the Philippines and some of these countries are seeking, support from the ASEAN, but ASEAN has not been so vocal against China over this disputed territory. So moving on, one of the aspects of, one of the key strategies employed by or adopted by China to re-emphasize its presence or to re-emphasize its position in the Indian Ocean region, and particularly to what you call to counter the emerging power of India. China adopted is what we commonly call a string of pearls strategy, where China, because China's vital shipping routes go via the this Persian Gulf to the Malacca Straits, right, to the South China Sea, right, and to the East China Sea there. So China has significant presence in the Indian Ocean from the commercial perspective, and it has a long history as well. So, but of late, China decided to, because China's ships and the trade routes go via the Indian Ocean, and China has to replenish some of its ships. So China decided to actually provide with, to increase its presence in the Indian Ocean by approaching the littoral states, some of the key littoral states such as, Pakistan, Maldives, Myanmar, Bangladesh, right, Sri Lanka, and it provided them with certain financial support to build port and the infrastructure, whether it is about the oil and gas pipelines, whether it is about rail and road connectivities or building their key ports. So that led to a kind of strategic encirclement, as we commonly know, as perceived by India, right, of the Indian subcontinent. So this string of pearls has played a key role in our understanding of Chinese approach in the Indian Ocean and how it has actually built allies or strategic. It has developed strategic relations with Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Pakistan, and Maldives, partly to of course help replenish its commercial vessels and ships, and also to strategically position itself as one of the key security stakeholders in the region. Yeah. So when we talk about the Belt and Road Initiative, which is very much, which has been the, which has been in the limelight since 2013, and particularly in the last few years, right? And it's followed by the so-called debt trap diplomacy. We all know that in a widely cited 2013 speech, President Xi Jinping shared his vision for the establishment of the overland economic corridor between China and Europe called the Silk Road Economic Belt. In October 2013, President Xi Jinping gave a speech to Indonesia's parliament in which he outlined a separate but related vision for the establishment of a sea route from China to Europe via South and Southeast Asia, Oceania, East Africa, and the Middle East called the Maritime Silk Road. Okay. So those are the so-called, the historical, also it has a long history of and historical background behind the China's Belt and Road initiatives, right? So what we call the One Belt, One Road initiative, came out of this China's emphasis. The One Belt, One Road initiative highlighted 5 connectivities or links to be built with partner countries as part of implementation of the scheme, including physical connectivity via infrastructure building, policy coordination, unimpeded trade, financial integration, and people-to-people exchanges. So President Xi also outlined the guiding principles for the initiative. That is, China would never intervene in the internal affairs of the partner countries, and it would strive for peaceful development and mutual benefits, through foreign partnerships. So what we call encapsulating this signature vision of the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, or what we call the China Dream. So this idea of great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation or the China Dream is the backbone, or it is the backdrop, or it is the so-called the philosophy surrounding the One Belt, One Road initiative, or the BRI initiative. So President Xi they announced during the APEC meetings in Beijing in November 2014 that China would establish a 40 billion fund to finance the construction of the OBOR, and the Bank of China announced plans to extend credit of no less than 20 billion to these OBOR related projects in 2015 and 100 billion more for the next 3 years as it came. And so that was the initial phase of the Belt and Road Initiative, or what we call the One Belt, One Road. So it is the what we may call the brainchild of President Xi Jinping, right? Since he came to power in 2012, right? And that's why the Belt and Road Initiative has a starting year 2030, right? Okay. And so between 2013 and 2016, an initial group of 31 countries, primarily from Europe and Asia, joined the initiative. And between 2017 and 2018, the Belt and Road Initiative's geographical scope expanded to 120 countries, including large swaths of Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, the Middle East, and Oceania. So the list of participants kept on growing even further to now 140 countries between 2019 and 2021. As you can see in the graph, there have been the color coding has been done to just emphasize which year which country joined the initiative. Okay. Yeah, you may see here in the next graph that yes, the BRI infrastructure projects which are underway by the graph explains the projects which are underway between 2013 and 2021 by the transaction value. And you can see it is all spread across the various continents and subcontinents, right? And the largest recipient of this, or the largest beneficiaries of the projects include Pakistan, Indonesia, Kazakhstan, who have more than, $10 billion worth of financing and funding for building infrastructure, right, under the BRI initiative. Okay, there have been also many African countries which received far more funding and financing from China under the BRI scheme or BRI initiative, right, including Kenya, Congo, and so Angola, and some other countries, to mention a few. Although there have been a lot of skepticism around this Belt and Road Initiative, and it was seen as a kind of some sort of, although China highlighted that is a far more, the initiative is based on China's commercial interest and economic interest. But many countries have had a skepticism around this initiative as China tried to, because many countries where there was a kind of compromise in terms of their sovereignty because of this initiative, which led some countries to give up their strategic assets, to also falling the trap of the kind of for the sovereign debt given by China Okay. So there have been some withdrawals also. There have been some countries which kind of suspended and canceled the BRI infrastructure projects, which include largest cancellations came from Malaysia, Argentina, Ecuador, Ukraine, the Philippines. Some of these countries have been given here, right? So it's not that always, of course, the BRI initiative is more of a huge scale with 140 plus countries, and perhaps the transaction value goes close to $900 billion. But there also been in the eye of skepticism from various countries and scholars, because it kind of also, this initiative not only provided with huge funding, but there were also the areas which were not properly assessed. I mean, there have been these, whether it is about the oil and gas pipeline, whether it is about the port, construction of the ports, most of these projects were not given proper, assessments. They were also politically motivated, and they were not having the, what you call that, economic, the potential in terms of profitability, and they kind of in between failed to achieve the social benefits, right? So there been some skepticism, and also it led to the debt trap aspect of this initiative, what we call the debt
Professor
trap
Kulkarni,
diplomacy.
may I just request you to please wind up in another 5 minutes,
Is it only 5 minutes? Okay.
so that we can have some more time for discussion.
All right. I have a few more slides about India and the conclusion. Okay, I'll try my best. Right. Okay. Yeah. So as you can see, Kenya borrowed $6.3 billion from China between 2010 and 15. Maldives received $1.4 billion between 2013-18. Laos received finances from China for its railway project worth of $6 billion. Sri Lanka, as we all know, borrowed 300 million in 2007, followed by 700 plus million in 2012 for the Hambantota port. Okay. And yeah, so, well, I would just like to skip the discussion on the debt trap diplomacy here, but we all know that there is no clarity as such whether it really set the debt trap diplomacy followed by the Belt and Road Initiative, but there have been these discussions around the countries falling into the trap of huge debt as a percentage of their sovereign debt as a percentage of the GDP, right? Okay. When it comes to the India security calculi, we know that India's foreign security policy after was particularly characterized by non-alignment, until the 1990s. During the Cold War, India, neither joined a military alliance nor was officially part of the two blocs. Right? India's strategic orientation remained toward the South Asian landmass, towards Pakistan and China in particular. So it kind of led to the neglect of the, maritime security or the oceanic defense. Indian security system was long time shaped by continental mentalities, meaning maritime aspects were almost consigned to the background. Okay, naval spending increased later on. I mean, if you see a shift that came in 1998 when the naval spending increased within the defense budget, it reached up to a new high of 14.5% of the defense budget, right? When the BJP came to power, as compared to 27 ships in 2006, now India has a fleet of 150 ships and submarines and 300 plus aircraft as of 2019, right? So if you look at some of the key milestones when it comes to India's presence in the Indian Ocean region, some of the poster boy, or what you call the signature milestones, include the Malabar exercise, which was launched in 1992 between India and US. The Milan exercise was initiated in 1995 with Southeast Asian countries. We all know the Sagar security and growth for all the region. Underlying the Indian Ocean security architecture was outlined in 2015 by India. It led to the regional mechanism for maritime cooperation and also saw the involvement of Mauritius, Seychelles, in addition to the tripartite cooperation in Sri Lanka and the Maldives. Okay, in 2021, the Indian Navy conducted over 50 joint maneuvers with friendly states in the Indian Ocean. Right, India also exports its arms and which to some of the countries, right? As you can read there, to Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Mauritius, and Seychelles. Okay, here is some of also the events, what we call the joint naval exercises with MOUs with some of these Indian Ocean region littoral, members, including Mauritius, Mozambique, Singapore, South Africa, Vietnam, all these countries, starting from 2003 to 2020 or right. So yeah, the economic reforms in 1991 and India's growing embeddedness in global markets and supply chain on the one hand, and international systems altered structures following the end of East-West conflict and China's rise in particular on the other hand, led to India's strategic realignment. Right, India is now focusing on maritime space, especially the Indian Ocean, through which large parts of its trade, energy, and raw material imports are transacted. Almost 95% of its trade takes place through this sea route. Increase anti-piracy. So when it comes to India has taken the role of net security provider, as we have witnessed India's activism through anti-piracy operations by the Indian Navy, arms deliveries to the neighboring states, joint education training program, and the provision of regional system for coastal surveillance and maritime domain awareness. So the rising strategic uncertainty in the Indo-Pacific is the joint result of Chinese expansionism, doubts about the durability of the US involvement, and the weakness of multilateral institutions as assessed by India. So India perceives China's actions in South China as the strategic encirclement, worries about freedom of navigation to South China Sea, and is alarmed by China's increased military presence in the Indian Ocean. Okay, not much time. 1 second. Yeah, so India's strategic pivot in the Indian Ocean region led by the continuum of policies from Look East policy, neighborhood first to Act East policy 2014, right? And it's culminated into the India's Indo-Pacific Ocean Initiative, IPOI, which envisages an open, inclusive security architecture in which regional security is maintained through a dialogue, a rule-based order, and the resolution of disputes based on international law. So we have had some of the quotes here. We are from the Shangri-La Dialogue. According to PM Modi, these rules and norms shall be based on the consent of all and not the power of a few states, on which in turn India's belief in multilateralism and regionalism and our firm commitment to rule of law principles are based, right? So PM Modi emphasized the need for free access for all actors in the region to Indo-Pacific sea and airspace, to resources and markets, which is possible if there is no great power rivalry and bipolarity. Indo-Pacific is perceived as an inclusive region in which all actors are to operate on an equal footing based on international law. So the open, inclusive Indo-Pacific security order is to be based on a multipolar structure, as it came from India's emphasize. A strong multipolar order is an important prerequisite for coping with Sino-American rivalry and preventing a slide into a bipolar order, and is also the cornerstone of stability and security in the Indo-Pacific region. Besides the US and China, now Russia and India are deemed to be the most important poles in the emerging multipolar order. So multilateralism plays, at best, a marginal role for India's, Indo-Pacific Ocean Initiative, although India is part of ASEAN-led multilateral forums such as East Asia Summit, then ARF,
Professor
ADMM+.
Kulkarni, can you just wind up, because now we are running short of time. It's almost 3:50 and we want to have some time for question and answers. Yeah. Okay, so India also have had many unilateral and trilateral agreements such as India, US, Japan, India, US, Afghanistan, India, Japan, Australia, of late, India, France, UAE. So these unilateral and trilateral arrangements are perceived to be more effective. Okay, they're playing a key role in the contested and strategic Indo-Pacific region, which has served, India so increased involvement in the trilateral and unilateral dialogues has coincided with the rise of Indo-Pacific concept here.
So I'll skip this discussion here. Okay, and move to the concluding remarks here. So India's active participation in the regional security architecture in the context of Indo-Pacific has been driven by prioritizing the strategic autonomy and multipolar regional order in contrast with China's expansionism in the Indo-Pacific region. India has been reluctant to institutionalize the regional security architecture while at the same time facilitated many and trilateral security arrangements with key partner countries in the region. China, on the contrary, has actively promoted various initiatives, especially BRI, and its engagements with South and Southeast Asian countries in order to cement its position as a regional powerhouse, protecting Chinese security and commercial interests. China has been active in institutionalizing its security mechanisms such as SCO and AIIB to pursue the President Xi's China dream. India's and China's varying approaches to regionalism in the Indo-Pacific are redrawing the power dynamic in the region. So in a nutshell, we may conclude that China's approach inclined to Sinocentric restructuring of the region, whereas India's approach to security regionalism potentially helps shape India's role as a reliable and key strategic partner in the region and plays out the balancing act for the security architecture in the region. With this, I conclude my presentation here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Kulkarni. I think it was a very interesting, broad overview of
Can
the
I stop
region.
sharing the screen?
Yes.
You
yes.
may want, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So thank you for a very broad overview of a comparative between India and China as they stand in terms of Indo-Pacific. I think your talk throws open a couple of very interesting questions. First one is, I mean, can one actually see a difference in approach of these two players in this particular region? And if there is a difference indeed, if it is moving beyond the idea of strategic power rivalry, what is that difference? I mean, is the approach basically a more nuanced approach in case of one player or vis-a-vis the other, where one can think about, non-traditional security imperatives in terms of reaching towards that region. And it's not merely reduced to a game of, strategic rivalry, containment, power balancing, or hegemonic sphere of influence. So that's one very interesting thing. And that is a question that we can mull over, especially in the context of and in the backdrop of the pandemic. Once we have seen the kind of, non-traditional insecurities emerging in that region and how the countries have tried to be more resilient, responses to that kind of non-traditional, security and insecurity dilemma that this region actually experiences collectively. So that also becomes one way of exploring a specific country's approach to this region. Second question that emerges is, has the concept of Indo-Pacific itself, I mean, the concept of Indo-Pacific itself, has it found greater currency in the approaches of, say, India itself and its allies, if there are allies, or if there are friendly nations in that sense. And in that context, one has to kind of go back to the initial reluctance that India itself, had in terms of reaching towards this region within the overarching paradigm of Indo-Pacific. Because the unsure approach initially basically stemmed from the fact that, is it basically to counter or contain another actor's approach to this particular region? Well, was it about being anti-China and that's all, or was there an original approach towards this region which basically led India to adopt the nomenclature of Indo-Pacific? And if one does adopt the nomenclature of Indo-Pacific, then what is it that comes on board? Is it about, again, seeking a more sustainable sense of cooperation, more sustainable structure of cooperation, giving rise to more connectivity, trade-led kind of, utilitarian approach? Or is it basically now finally, bandwagoning to that group of actors who were trying to change the nomenclature of this region, primarily to oppose the regional strategies of China? So I think that initial reluctance and what basically proved to be a catalyst in terms of shifting of strategies, if at all it was a shifting of strategies, becomes an interesting, moment in India's regional strategy towards this particular geography. That needs to be unpacked, and perhaps there we find some kind of also indication as to how India now sees, or what are the options that India has in terms of making its strategy more dynamic, making its approach more dynamic when we talk about aligning with this region. I think two things have emerged in most of the strategic discourse that we read. One is the question of strategic autonomy. I mean, it's possible to evaluate whether what we have gained and what we have perhaps not yet achieved in terms of strategic autonomy when we try and reach towards this region within this construct of Indo-Pacific. And also the question of whether we have gained a perception of aligning with certain other actors, approach towards that region, whether it's, Australia, whether it's New Zealand, whether it's UK, US, Japan, I mean, how they look at this particular region and how finally now we are looking at that region. So there is a sense, whether there is a sense of alignment with their regional strategies. So I think that's also another interesting thing that we can do, a comparative of other actors' regional strategies here, and how well India and China are actually playing that game, how much are they able to align themselves with other major powers who are quite active in this particular region. And so I basically invite the participants to mull over these questions, to think about the set of priorities that emerge for India in Indo-Pacific. Is there a set of priorities in Indo-Pacific? And is also whether we have a sense of the direction that India is taking in terms of its regional strategies. And you have outlined in your presentation the steps that basically India took in terms of approaching this region. So from Look East to new version of Look East to the whole discomfiture about BRI of China, and then trying to align with this particular region with a sense of focus, and also aligning with other powers there. So now I throw open the I basically open up the dialogue where I invite questions from all the participants. There is a question, I think, from Rahul. And he has raised a question in the chat box: how should one define a country as the net security provider? I think that's a very interesting question, because he's referring to China's overall proactiveness so far as it is compared with India in the Indo-Pacific. So can India also claim that parameter or that particular thing of net security provider in the Indo-Pacific if it is becoming active there? I invite you to respond to this question. And I also invite the participants to raise more questions while he's addressing this one.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for summarizing the discussion and coming up with certain, important themes from this from this talk. Actually, yeah, it's an emerging area wherein we are all, trying to understand different facets about the security dynamism in the broader Asia, Indo-Pacific region, and the role played out by India and China. And you rightly mentioned how, it's the kind of, there are also non-traditional security or insecurity, elements, and how these countries, including India, has come up with certain strategies. What are the key differences that in the approach of both India and China? And some of it has been alluded to in my presentation. And also this idea of reluctance of India to this new construct in the beginning, and is it just because that some of its key allies, we should not call allies as well, but the key friendly states or partners have joined in the Indo-Pacific as a new construct regional or new regional order, and as India also, kind of we may not call it force, but it's a part of natural progression to join in the construct. So this question which has come about the net security provider is also not necessarily a conclusive, it's a possibility that we're trying to understand, because it's about particularly this discussion or this talk is about the past decade or so, comparing India and China's approach, particularly the Xi administration, the President Xi Jinping, and India's Modi administration, because it's this the overlap of the emergence of the new security order, what we call the nomenclatures. Indo-Pacific is from 2012 onwards, wherein also the China became a little more assertive as compared to its previous some of its presidential or its China's Communist Party rhetoric about bide and hide and become more focus on the internal reforms and modernization. And it's only after these particularly Xi Jinping taking over the presidency, and he has talked about the rejuvenation of China and its Chinese dream. So that's the time frame, basically, the last decade or so, where we are comparing both the regions in the context of Indo-Pacific. So yes, there has been, as we have seen that India's approach in the Indo-Pacific, China has been far more assertive when it came to its, what you call the through this Belt and Road Initiative, or through its financing, providing sovereign debt to some of these countries. It's been also, if you talk about the China and its relations with Southeast Asia, we know that there have been certain surveys which explain that yes, China plays like a deterrence, and there has been certain elements of what you call the areas of trust. I mean, many countries, although recognize, or they really find China as one of the significant players in the region, and many countries have the trade deficit with China, but there's a significant deterrence which came from China when it comes to the so there's a kind of the surveys highlight the trust deficit over a period of time, and certain countries have also been skeptical of these certain initiatives of China. But India, on the contrary, has been highly, doing it more from the bottom-up approach, if I may use the word, where you're first trying to strengthen, corroborate, and build on the bilateral, relations which India has had, whether it is with Japan, US, or of late the Australia, France, and then it has been able to build up on those bilateral, relations. What we call now is a new mechanism of trilateralism or minilateralism. So and another area is that is dialogue platforms, or these dialogue partnerships are not so binding in nature, right? India is in a way able to safeguard its, what we call the strategic, autonomy, in terms of not signing any agreement or being part of certain allies or taking sides with the US or any other country, because India has this tradition of non-alignment and is trying to maintain its strategic autonomy via this new mechanism under which India doesn't need to be part of any particular treaty as such, right? So this fall in favor of India, the emerging, trilateral, and whether it is we talk about Quad or yeah, okay, some discussions going on.
Okay. Do we have any more questions? The participants can also raise their hands if they have.
Only me. Sorry, I was able to hear something, but okay, no. Yeah. So the last
just saying if there are any questions, any more questions. Yeah. If anyone has a question and they want to raise it directly, you just have to raise your hand and unmute yourself.
So yeah, my point here is that, yes, we may not conclude that India has become a net security provider as we may. It's not so, it's too early to talk about it. But yes, we are in the direction of gaining the trust and becoming, going deeper into the Indian. So far, it has been all about South Asia. India was constrained by the SAARC, it was not able to push its interests via the SAARC partnership. But India also tried to do, India also tried innovative approach, whether we call BIMSTEC or whether we talk about BBI in Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal, motor vehicle agreement. So there have been these initiatives, what we call the sub-regionalism, right? So India always tried to figure out the ways and means to overcome the regional challenges. And now it is trying to play a bigger role in the Indian Ocean region through these innovative, approaches, which are not binding as such, or not trying to compromise India's sovereign autonomy.
So yes,
And
there is a question
yes.
by Abhinav. Yeah. Abhinav, would you like
Good
to?
afternoon, sir.
Yeah.
Very good afternoon.
Sir, very wonderful presentation. Sir, I just want to share my some observations and comments about how you particular manner. Sir, since you have mentioned your PP, all those hotspots, especially during the in the region of Taiwan Strait and through Philippines and Southeast Asian countries. So these are the major routes of trade from where China is mostly uh, and 50% its raw material from African countries and India also and Australia also. So these are the major trade routes, especially in the current scenario. That is the rare earth materials and to produce lithium battery and the EV cars. So these are already in action through in the trade. So do you see any alternative to OBOR, or how to see this? Thank you.
You have to unmute yourself, Professor Kulkarni.
Yeah, sorry. So there was some intermittent loss of voice when I was hearing Abhinav. Thank you very much for your question, but I could not really get to the exact question that you have had. You're talking about that, yes, this, although I highlighted about the hotspots of conflict and the elements of destabilizing security, but there have been increasing trade between China and some of these countries, isn't it, right? And then what was exactly your question?
I think the
Sorry.
question was, the question was whether there is an alternative to BRI.
Okay, right. Okay, so yeah, as in my opinion or in my understanding, what I see is that it's a huge, initiative, or like what you call that, Belt and Road Initiative, and it's very unlikely for single country to come up with certain initiatives as China has accomplished over the years, based on its what we may call the trade surpluses and what we call the balance of trade position, and also with sort of the past history of modernization and reforms that China is able to reap the benefits of opening up of the markets vis-a-vis other countries. But it's very unlikely to find, unless, as we have seen, that many strategic partners come together. I mean, one of the best example is ASEAN. Now ASEAN has 10 member states, and it is not a small group of countries, but it has not been able to even emphasize its ASEAN centrality, right? It's not been able to counter China because there is always trade element, economic diplomacy involved, and it is not so easy for these countries also to counter China. So also there has been this involvement of supply chain and the remarkable, with the countries connecting to each other, it's not very easy to come up with something that is at the scale of BRI. That's what I feel.
Okay. Are there any more questions? Okay, I can see another raised hand. Who is raising hand? Is there? Yeah. Professor Acharya. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
So, thanks, Mandar. It was, as the chair was pointing out, it was a fairly expansive, exhaustive treatment that you have given to the regionalism underpinning the Indo-Pacific. But what occurred to me, and it comes out of some points that Dr. Tiwari also raised, that what is the utility of looking at these new regional dynamics, primarily from the prism of realpolitik? There are two factors I would submit, and I would like just your reactions. I mean, these are obviously unfolding and therefore not likely to be answered conclusively in a sense. But two factors which I feel are going to transform the Indo-Pacific sphere. And, even that is sort of coming up against very different challenges, right? So one set of challenges came out of the COVID, and it showed how these countries had to now react and engage with in entirely different ways. Now, I would argue that most of the countries of this region have historical, cultural connects, which do not lend themselves to easy kind of, let's say, power politics kind of regionalism. That even though you may have very solid problems, you are engaging with each other, you're cooperating with each other, you're investing in each other, and there is a context which permits them to actually tide over their divergences and converge on common concerns. So this is one very important aspect of the countries of the Indo-Pacific. And how will this play out further as we see, which is the second element coming in, with the changed role of the United States? Clearly, everybody is anticipating that the new dispensation in the American polity is going to be a very different player, and it's not really going to be the kind of policeman of the world. And in that context, the earlier question becomes interesting. Who's a net security provider? Certainly, we will have to face the idea that the United States may not be that. So in that case, one, very straight, is it going to be a contestation between India and China about setting the security agenda? Or do you think, therefore, that there will be space for India and China to actually come together to discuss ways and means to provide these underpinnings for the new regional dynamics, if you will? So I'm just putting it out there whether realpolitik really is a very useful tool in helping us understand the complexities.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that very wonderful comment and pointing out the importance of realpolitik. As it's one of the studies I don't remember, but it talked about China's approach in a sense, or we say the China's the rationale behind what China is and has been doing is realpolitik. But yes, it is. The region is connected through a long history, like historical connection, cultural connection, right? And I mean, most of the Southeast Asian region in particular has had a long history of, people-to-people interactions and trade, whether it is, the maritime trade. And we have seen mostly like when it comes to India-Japan relations, for instance, there is still the trade deficit, and many, because they look, although there has been a skepticism from China or some of, they still have the huge reliance on this Chinese, in particularly on China, because they've invested in this in China, and there has been some resemblance of culture and history, and it's very difficult to find that common cultural setting when it comes to distant countries. Yeah, but of course we also have the connect, which has been very long. And but yeah, so my point here is that yes, it's very early to talk about what will be, because we have seen how US has been at times, like it withdrew from TPP, and it became difficult for the region to come up with then another alternative. China as emerging regional power is always trying to fill the void with the withdrawal of the US. India, on the contrary, playing a balancing act. So that's a huge realpolitik that is out there. But given that, I think, as you rightly mentioned, India is still part of BRICS and SCO, and there is a larger scope for India, although India withdrew from RCEP. But there is still scope for India to be part of these groups and to join hands where it is, particularly when it comes to, as Ritusha Tiwari mentioned about the non-traditional insecurity or security aspects such as piracy, or talking about the humanitarian aid and disaster relief. So these are the what you call the areas of soft power where India can join hands with China and really come up with certain comprehensive mechanism. But certainly on the ground, there is a huge trade deficit when it comes to India and China. There is a huge trade surplus when it comes to India and US. India is part of, India is a friend, Japan, South Korea, or now the UAE to some extent are the friendly states for India. Whereas China, we don't see that kind of common platform. So it's a huge leap. It's a leap for both the countries if they were to bring certain commonality there. And yes, it's a small thing there from my side. I don't know if I'm able to explain anything on that, but yes.
No, I thank you. I think your response is reflecting the kind of uncertainties that are at the moment characterizing the Indo-Pacific scene. So I think, yes, it's an unfolding scenario, but what we need to do is just carefully watch the kind of trends that are likely to affect. Yeah. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Acharya, and thank you, Professor Kulkarni. I think we've had a very interesting session of question answers. And I hand over back to Akshat. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tiwari. I now seek your permission to bring an end to today's session. Thank you so much. With this, ladies and gentlemen, we come to the end of today's seminar. We thank Dr. Kulkarni Mandar Vijay and Dr. Tiwari for gracing today's seminar with their presence and for giving us their precious time. The video of today's discussion shall be available on the ICS's YouTube channel. We would also like to inform you that the ICS is organizing the 17th All India Conference of China Studies in collaboration with the China Study Center, Department of Geopolitics and International Relations, Manipal Academy of Higher Education, Manipal, from 21 to 23 November 2024. Consequently, there will be no Wednesday seminar next week on the 20th of November. Information regarding all of ICS's events is available on the ICS website, and you may also subscribe to our newsletter for regular updates. Thank you so much for joining us today, ladies and gentlemen.